Welcome everyone to Books and Brunch with BYTA. I'm Dr. Gail Parker, AKA Dr. Gail. I'm president of the board of directors of the Black Yoga Teachers Alliance, and we are happy that you are joining us for this episode of Books and Brunch. And I'm happy to be able to introduce our host and producer, BYTA Moran, who is a valued member of BYTA, and she's also a full-time yoga teacher. And she co-owns Charlotte Family Yoga in Charlotte, North Carolina. In addition to that, she owns her own CPA firm, the Office of BYTA Moran. She enjoys merging her faith, fitness and mindfulness, yoga practices, and finance to educate and empower those within her sphere of influence. BYTA lives in Harrisburg, North Carolina with her husband, 2 children, and their beloved cockapoo, Maple. BYTA, it is wonderful to be able to welcome you to introducing acclaimed author, Octavia Raheem.
I see one of my teachers, Robin, is on here. So excited when friends come together and join us for these events. I am here to host Octavia Raheem. She is the author of the book of the hour, Pause, Rest, Be. She is a mother first. She is a yoga teacher with 14 years of experience. She's a yoga practitioner. She's an author. She's an activist. She's been a school teacher for 10 plus years in the K through 12 setting. She is an amazing human being, and I have enjoyed both of her books. I am here to welcome Octavia Raheem.
And then wait, BYT to
Welcome,
Thank you,
Octavia.
BYTA.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Before we get started, I just want to ask people to make sure they are muted. I'm hearing some background. I don't know if it's just me. Okay. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, and thank you, BYTA, for having me.
Yes. So we're here about this amazing book. I've read it. You've wrote it. Some of us have read it. But can you share with the community here what this book is about? Pause, rest, be.
So on the most simple level, this book is, it is what the title says, right? So it's about pausing, it's about resting, it's about being. And the subtitle is Stillness Practices for Courage in Times of Change. And the times of change that I write about in the book are when we're navigating endings, be they expected or unexpected. And then when we're in that in between, or what I call the liminal space of threshold, where we're not at an ending and we're also not quite at a beginning. Many of us have felt like that in the past 2 years, right? Like, where is the space? And then how to navigate beginnings. But the anchor to the navigation, which I found ironic and also beautiful, is stillness as the navigational tool, and more specifically, restorative yoga. And so in the book, I anchor each section. So there are 3 sections: endings, the space in between, and beginnings. And I anchor each section with a restorative pose that I've personally found and my students have found to be really comforting and supportive still points while navigating the ending, the middle, or the place in between, and beginnings. And so in short, Pause, Rest, Be is about the power of the pause, is about the necessity of rest, and the I think, mandate that we remember what it is to be, even when we are faced with the biggest challenges of our lives.
Especially after 2020. So
Right.
2020 was a lot. That's how I came to know of your work, this practice of stillness within the pandemic. I think at that point you had closed, you made a decision to close your yoga studio, and then you brought us to Gather, your previous book. Um, that came out, I think, April 2020. We're a little bit into the pandemic, not a lot into the pandemic, not knowing that we would be home for the length of time that we had been. Um, and your words were just so poetic. It was kind of a balm for a sticky time in life where we were
Mm.
unsure about a lot of things. And I don't know about the other yoga practitioners and yoga teachers here, but that book kind of got me through some yoga classes as I learned to teach on Zoom and learn
Mm.
how to be present with people where they are. And then, most importantly, you brought in this practice of restorative yoga. I knew what restorative yoga was. I ran from restorative yoga because I'm a power girl. And if anyone has read the book or read Octavia's story, she was a power girl. Like, give me all the power 5 days a week. I want to, take all the chaturangas and the down dogs. Um, and then I got into this space where I felt like the doing was too much. And I needed a place of rest, but still was kind of fidgety in the restorative yoga. How does one get comfortable shifting from a practice that brought me to yoga power into this, okay, honey, you need to slow down a little bit, restore, and go into restorative? You have any insights on that?
Well, first, I want to honor and name Dr. Gail Parker as one of my restorative teachers, as the OG, as a luminary, and as a person who has deeply impacted the path that I'm on right now. And you asked one question, but I hear a few things in your statement that feel juicy to talk about. And so I want to take the word power, for instance, and what we are calling power yoga, and invite us to expand the definition of power to be something that is deeply sourced from within and through lineage, and that helps us to activate our legacy, and that power isn't just simply this show of or even ability to exert energy in the direction of whatever. In an instance of yoga, it's like, what can I do with my physical body a lot, in terms of what we think about power is. And what happened to me as a student of what was being called power yoga is I started to feel very disempowered. And what I mean by that is that I could feel that I was really focusing a lot on the external of the most outer layer of my being, if we're talking about the koshas, right, which is the physical body in that practice. And also, though, there's something really beautiful about yoga and asana in general, even if you've never heard of these other gateways to yoga, these other layers of it. If you practice asana long enough, at some point you start to, I started to get really curious about, this can't be it. Like, is there more to this practice than this? And what's the more? And from asana, I was introduced to, or the posturing, right? I was introduced to meditation. And I remember feeling like the first time I really, really was introduced to meditation by a pretty masterful teacher, that introduced it in the most simplest and accessible ways, which I think is what masterful teachers are able to do. I remember sitting there and feeling more connected from the inside to the source of my power, to who and what I am. And I actually had a crisis in that, meaning that I was like, wait, I'm sitting here, I'm doing nothing. and I feel really steady in my seat. I feel really powerful. I feel really clear. I feel like my capacity just expanded. But here I have, at this point, I'm over here doing all the warrior twos and obsessing over exactly where my toes should be and all these things. And that doesn't make me feel powerful. And so your question was about um, how to stay open to that shift.
Yes.
And that really is, how do we stay open to any change, to any transformation. I think on many levels we can be creatures of habit, and once we find something, we're like, I just want it to stay the same. But the great writer and visionary, I'd say Octavia E. Butler, said, all that we touch, we change. And all that we change changes us. The only lasting truth is change. And so I think part of why I ended up opening a yoga studio is because I know that how people are introduced to yoga and where the entry point is impacts how the journey goes. And the way I was introduced to it was like, it is this way, and like it was like this. and that made my confrontation with my own practice changing more painful than it had to be. If someone at the beginning of the journey was like, it's a journey, the path will be winding. You will meet yourself and unearth yourself and remember yourself in new ways, and that will cause you to need, desire, and want something different for your practice, right? Yeah. And so I didn't have that as my introduction into the practice. And as a teacher, I seek to teach in a way that's the way I introduce the path to people. And then for those of us who we didn't, and we find ourselves in a situation where we're like, the world is changing, my inner world is changing, the place of comfort, right? Because our practice can be like a home base, but what happens when that home base changes?
Yeah.
What happens when your body refuses the physicality of the practice, or you have an injury, or you have a global pandemic? What happens, right?
Yeah.
And part of that is this conversation that I have with my students. It is a journey. The path will change. It will be winding. You will remember, you will forget. And so the word I would say is most helpful when confronted with the changing life body practice is allow, right? Allow and pay attention. And then the other thing I honor is that we don't live in a culture that respects rest. We so disrespectful to rest. Like, can I get an amen? Right? Like, because I'm like, I know, like there's a level of disrespect to rest, to pausing, to resting and being, right? And so when we endeavor to go against the grain, to say, you know what? I have to press the brakes. I have to slow down. I have to pause. We butt up against a lot of friction externally, and that creates internal friction, right? But also my understanding of tapas is that that's what tapas is. It's the friction. And again, when I was a power yogi, and I have to use air quotes, and not to like demean power yoga. I just until we expand the definition, I have to use air quotes when I say power yoga. And the way I was learning about tapas as a power yogi was like this hard, brash discipline. And I don't think that's clearly not what it is. It's how I was learning about it, or how I was hearing it, or the place that I could hear from, right?
Yeah, at the
time. And now, at the time. And now I understand tapas to be that friction, right? I'm rubbing my hands together because then that creates heat, right? But also that friction can rub us raw, but also produce our radiance and shine. And it is a profound tapas when we do a practice like rest, like meditation, like anything that calls us into the slow and the deeper listening, because we're going against the grain of this really, really sad, destructive, unhealthy culture we live in, inhumane in many ways. And the friction of going against that is also part of where I've been able to find my own inner radiance and shine and voice and be able to create the things I create. So I don't know if that answered your question, right? But
Yeah.
I would start with
So many
allowing.
jewels.
When you
So many
when you
jewels.
find, yes, when you find your practice changing, allow. You know, and I'm not saying that like it's easy, because it's like a whole identity shift. It's a whole identity shift. And so I wrote Pause, Rest, Be. I started writing it in June 2020. And I think all of us know what was happening in June 2020, globally. And then if you're in the US, what happened with George Floyd. And so I knew I was writing a book. Right? I didn't act like I knew what the book was going to be, meaning I wasn't married to anyone. I decided to take these long walks, and I would just essentially listen. I would go, Spirit, what is it you would have me to say? Right. And as I'd be walking, I just would listen to the sounds around me, remember conversations I'd be having with folks. And I remember one day I was walking, I was like, so much is ending, so much has ended. What do we do with this? What do I do with this? And then I knew I'd be writing something about endings. Right? And then, another walk, I'm walking. But we're in this murky place. The word everyone kept using was uncertainty. And the place of uncertainty is usually that place in between, right? The summer between high school and college, right? The moment between an engagement and the actual ceremony, like the moment maybe after a divorce, and then what's next? Like you enter into this period where it can be very murky and cloudy and unsure. And so I said, okay, I think I'm writing a book about what happens when we get into that place, because we're there now. Everyone's calling it uncertain. And in the midst of even those endings, right? Because if we take this moment that was a catalyst for me with George Floyd, and it really is like we all knew that reality, but what was the catalyst was I'm looking around, I'm like, oh, people are shook up and woke up in a really different way. And one of my closest girlfriends is a white woman, and I was watching, I was like, oh, her world is ending as she knew it, and I was like, oh, that ended for me when I was 4, but it's still, all these endings need to be honored. And I was like, oh, but a new reality is dawning, like something else is beginning as well. And so I started the book with endings because I said, like, I was sitting, and we were collectively sitting in a place of many endings, whether they were personal, global, really profoundly collective. And so I wanted to start with endings. And I also think endings require exceptional courage and capacity to let go. And so that part of my inspiration for the book was literally the time stamp location that I found myself writing in and out of, and this desire to write something that could really be of service and walk with not just myself, but others who were facing these incredible transitions within the midst of kind of collective upheaval and transition. So that's what inspired the book.
Awesome. That was I see some things happening in the chat, and it was like this my entire conversation, just pre-chatting with Octavia friends. It was like jewels dropped the entire time. I was just like trying to pay attention, and I'm writing because there were so many little nuggets. Like I have a little board over here with some sticky notes on it, and I like to just read off of those encouraging quotes and everything that people speak in our lives. So but thank you guys in the chat for dropping them in there so I don't have to be typing, and I can just copy and paste them when we get finished. So you talked about we don't honor resting in our society, and I was a former type A, probably still type A, but absolutely had to have my calendar. Oh, there's a weekend open. Let's stick something in there. And when there was a book club um, that was attached to the release of Pause Rest Be earlier in the year. And I like that we had individual times to like say a prayer from the book. And we had individual time to carve out some of the quotes and sayings in the book. And then we broke out into these breakout sessions. And I remember that the three people who were in the breakout session with me, um, some kind of way we got off topic. I know this is what happens with me. It wasn't some kind of way. We went down a rabbit hole of, oh, growing up, we listened to the words of Jeezy, the Atlanta rapper, if you don't know him, who said, I'll sleep when I die. Like, let me do all the things right now and I'll sleep when I die. And I was like, how did we get programmed? Like, how did we believe that that was to be a truth, that let me keep grinding, let me keep hustling, I'll sleep when I die. And so we all sat with that in that book club. I took it from the book club and I took it back to my own studio. And it was 4 or 5 teachers in the studio that day. And we just sat chatting about how do we get to this point? Number one, we had released restorative yoga from our schedule, which was like issue number one in the whole grand scheme of things. But we were talking about, why do we keep driving this mindset of power and hustle and grind? And why do we not take a moment to practice stillness? We still had yin, which is, if some of you know yin, restorative, they sometimes get kind of convoluted. They're two different practices. But we had yin there, but there was nothing that offered us deep rest. And so, my question after going through all of that is, how do we encourage deep rest? Because we can go to yin, I can go to yin and I can sit still for 3 minutes. But how do we get to that space? And I guess it's an allowing as well of honoring that deep rest that restorative offers to us.
Well, starting with your 3 minutes is perfect. It's not to be dismissed or shamed in any way. We start where we start. I want to honor that. And I also want to backtrack a little bit. I want to backtrack a little bit because you mentioned Jeezy and you mentioned, I just want to name that for us, Black folks, Black Americans, people born on water. You all know that I love the little story by Nicole. Her last name escapes me right now. She did the 1619 project, but we are people born on water. And I'm like, I don't individualize this challenge around resting. I don't mean for any person, specifically any Black person, more specifically any Black woman, to go, I'm the problem, I'm the reason I can't rest. I'm like, we got at least 400 years of someone being like, you cannot, like, what was the consequence of rest? What was the use of our bodies? And I do not dismiss, and it's why Dr. Gail Parker's work has been so important to me. I do not dismiss the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade, us becoming a people and us working in this land and being forced free labor, the impact of that on our nervous systems and our ability to rest. What I will say is that, so it's a collective challenge, and we are not the problem, right? And we are deeply resourceful. It is up to us to solution for ourselves around rest. But what I want to name also is that it's really layered for us, what it takes for us to find and come into a sense of safety and protection around resting, which is also why I think even this platform and forum and everything that BYTA does is so important, right? And so you said, how do we come to rest? And you said, I do my little 3 minutes, and I wanted to clap for you and say, that's where you start, right? Because just with anything, we have to build capacity for it, right? You have to have some sense of even tolerance for it, right? I never like, if I'm teaching and someone seems like they can't be still, I don't go stop fidgeting. When I taught power, I did way more of that. And now I'm just like, the 30 seconds that they were still, it's the 30 seconds that they could be still. Then they needed to shift and adjust. If someone's not closing their eyes, I'm like, I don't know. I don't make a lot of assumptions anymore about why someone might not be doing something, right? And so in the book, it felt important for me to teach 3 really accessible restorative poses and give guidance. And then I have an audio book where if you have the audio book, you can kind of fast forward and basically get an audio practice of me guiding you through the practice. And in that way, you can make the practice a minute if that's what you can do today, 10 minutes if that's what you can do today, right? And so a prerequisite to deep rest for me is having a relationship with the pause. I just invited us to have a relationship with the pause when I stopped talking, right? That's how we start. Most of us, what is even our relationship to the pause? But if I sit here for a minute and it seems unplanned, that might create some tension, right? For me, for you, for someone listening, like do something next. Something has to be next, right? So that's the first thing. And we have natural pauses exist everywhere within us, around us. And here's what I mean by that. If you inhale, what happens after the inhale? There's a natural pause. We don't have to make it up, right? We can, you know, when I taught more forceful yoga, we're like all the kumbhas, like I'm gonna hold my breath, which is fine. Like there's a place and time for that. But I'm like, a natural pause is built into the inhale or into the breath after the inhale. Exhale, there's a pause. And I also have this practice in the book. It's called pause breath. Inhale, pause, exhale, pause. That's where my relationship started with like, what even is my relationship with the pause? My relationship to rest started with that, right? And so that's where we start. If you are a teacher of yoga, I'd be like, that's where you invite your students to start. Be in relationship with the pause, be in relationship with the pause between the poses, be in relationship with the pause between, I brought my hands together, pause. I release them, pause, right? Because that starts to build your capacity to then move toward the rest that you might find in Shavasana, right? I teach Shavasana in the book. And then when we can stay in rest, 3, 5, 10, 20 minutes, these restorative poses, then we settle into being, which is that place where we're really present to what is right now. And that doesn't mean we have nothing in life to do. It just means we understand we ain't doing it now, right? That's how I think about being, right? Like all of us, it's a great honor for people to take a whole hour out of their day to come be in this space, right? We're being right now. And I know everyone on here has a list of things that need to happen next, but for now we have an awareness that we're resting in this conversation together, right? So to recap, because that was a long answer, to build a relationship with rest, because I don't ever really think it's about finding time. Because I'm like, we find time for a lot of stuff. We be finding time to be on Instagram for 30, 40 minutes, a day. And so I'd start with the pause. And then I'd move into, now can I do one of these poses in the book, or can I do a restorative pose or practice a restorative pose for some time? And then stay there and notice when being descends upon you.
That's beautiful. As I accept the natural pause, which I don't do. So I have my intention for the day. And that was a beautiful segue for us just to maybe go into practicing the pause here with Octavia leading us through. How do we pause?
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to be super transparent, you all, with it's been so interesting being on the journey with my book, Pause, Rest, Be, and writing a book about rest. Because I'm still circling back to the question of inspiration. I could have been like, how to use power walking to get through endings, beginnings, how to use green juice, but I chose restorative yoga and rest and stillness because we are tired. People are tired. The earth is tired. The mothers, the fathers, the children, the uncles, the aunties, the grandmothers are tired. And so the transparent moment I want to have with you all is that I actually have great difficulty talking about rest when I know deep down in my Black woman bones, right, that everyone listening on some level is tired. And so it felt really important to me today to offer a moment of actual rest and respite, because it's time to move beyond, even though I write about rest, right? And I think about it and I read about it, I study about it all the time. It's time to move beyond that to really embodying rest, right? Which is different from sleep, right? And sometimes they start to conflate, because what happens when I teach restorative yoga, if I'm teaching a person who's deeply physically tired, usually within 3 minutes, if we're going to do a 10-minute pose, within 3 minutes, somebody's snoring, right? And someone's asleep. And for me, I'm like, you were physically tired and your body said, let me take this restful moment and drop into sleep. I'm out, right? Like I'm just out, And the way though with restorative yoga, when we practice it enough, we'll start to have this experience of being awake and relaxed, right? Most of us don't have a relationship. We're either awake and doing all the things, or we sleep and just kind of like knocked out, right? And so rest is also this embodiment of the in-between state in this one sense. So that's more yoga nidra. I teach that too. So restoration in yoga is this place of being awake, having a sense of awareness, and being relaxed. And most of us, when we're sleeping, sometimes we have even fitful sleep, right? If we don't have restful points in our day, at least this is what I've learned over the past, 14 or so years, is that when people lack pausing or respite places in the day, the sleep doesn't even restore. Right? Like there's a such thing as sleep hygiene, meaning like, what you do the last hour you're awake really impacts how your sleep restores your body or recalibrates you or not. And most of us, I don't know, nobody needs to raise their hand, right? But if you just are kind of like going up to the moment where you kind of collapse in bed and you get up and you do it all over again, right? So I was trying to respond to the question in the chat of how does restoration yoga differ from sleep? And I also did want to take just a few moments to invite people into an embodied place with me to move from just talking about rest to seeing how it feels in your body. Can I do that for about
Absolutely.
5 or so minutes? And so wherever you are, I really want you to pause wherever you are. And I'm sitting at my desk, right? And so if I were on the other side of this and someone said, oh, we've been to rest, I wouldn't move, even though I'm looking, so here's another rest tip for me. I keep my I call it a rest nest, set up in my room so that I don't have an excuse for not doing my restorative pose for the day, right? I leave my mat down, I leave a blanket down, I leave 2 pillows and a bolster down, right? You don't have to have, you can have just whatever you have in your house, but the place that I'm gonna rest outside of my bed, right? I don't do my restful practices in my bed because I have a lot of sleep associations, right? And so I can get in my bed and just be like, oh, I'm out. But my association with the special place that I go to rest, which is to settle down and remain awake while deeply relaxed I leave that set up so that the barrier to practice isn't, I gotta set my stuff up again, right? And so what I'm saying all that to say is, if I were on this call as a participant, I could easily just in 2 seconds go get in my rest nest. But I also really want to invite you to be wherever you are, right? Like I'm at a desk. If I were the student here, I'd just stay at my desk to see, can I settle into some sense of rest from wherever I am, right? Now, if you're in a moving car, you might actually want to turn the volume down and not listen in too closely. Hopefully you're not in some moving vehicle, right? So if you're at a desk, look around your room, make sure you feel safe and comfortable, then just put your head down. That's it, just put your head down, right? And if you were like, no, I came set up hoping that we had a moment to actually lay down and you're already on the floor, then lay down. But if you don't have a pillow, do grab a pillow, right? If you are sitting, at your kitchen table, just kind of ease back in the chair and let it be easy for you. So I want to pause and give you a moment to just, I see people sitting on their couches, right? Perfect. You can stay sitting up. You can move your head back or drop your head down. Because it's really important to really start to know that wherever you find yourself, you can meet yourself there and pause and rest. It's also really nice when we set up for a full practice, but that's not what we're doing right now. So you just notice what this invitation to pause right here feels like in your body. Not, what thoughts you're having about what it feels like, but what it actually feels like in your body. And for me, what helps is just to start to body scan or to scan my body from bottom, like toes to top, and then from top to bottom. And then notice what it feels like to pause, not just as an individual, but as a collective within the context of a space created for us. Notice how your body receives this context, right? Because the context matters. And then notice your breath. Notice your inhalation. And it will likely be helpful to notice by feeling the touch of the inhalation as it enters into the nostrils. Next time you inhale, notice the pause after the inhale. Next time you exhale, notice the pause after the exhale. So what are we doing? This is a practice I shared in the book, Pause RSV. It's called Pause Breath, where we inhale and notice the pause. When we exhale, we notice the pause. And noticing isn't manipulating, shifting, or even trying to change. It's coming into a really initial relationship with something, right? We just notice there's a pause. Sometimes people go, I just don't know how to pause. And I go, well, notice where there is a natural pause and see if you can just begin the relationship there, noticing. So you're inhaling, you're noticing your pause, you're exhaling, you're noticing your pause, or the pause. Do that 2 more times where you inhale, notice the pause, and then exhale, notice the pause. And then let go of that pause breath and notice your body again. And then just one more practice from the book. It starts the midsection, which is the liminal. And then that section of the book, I teach one of my favorite restorative poses, which is side lying pose. And you don't have to lay on your side now. You can even just visualize yourself curled up on your side. And notice what even holding the vision of seeing yourself resting on your favorite side, what that does for your body, even though you're not actually doing it, right? But when I teach that pose, I like to offer these words to be repeated. And if they resonate with you as I say them, you can do this for the next 30 seconds or so with me. As you inhale, just quietly say amazing. And as you exhale, grace. Because it's when we're in those in-between spaces where something has ended and we hope something's beginning, but we just don't know. We can't turn around and we don't know what's ahead. That's when we really hope and pray, lean into and call on amazing grace. So inhale, silently say to yourself, amazing. And exhale, grace. And just notice how that lands in your body. At some point in the next 2 or 3 breaths, let the words go and simply rest in the grace that is. And I'll be quiet for just about 20 seconds, and then we'll shift. And then you notice your body, your breath, your body and breath in this container, in this place, in this here place, in the circle of BYTA. And when you're ready, just really feel whatever's beneath you, that support. Notice your body, notice where your hands are, notice your breath. With eyes still closed, visualize the room you're in. What did it feel like to pause, right? To rest in this way? Did it bring you into a space of being able to be, which means you weren't worried about what there was to do or trying to do, you just were here. When you're ready, you open your eyes. So that's the essence of the book. I want people to read it more than reading the book. as much as reading the book. I really want people to practice the restorative practices in it. And each chapter ends with, a really short practice or a reflection. And I mean for it to be a companion and a guide for people as they navigate or wade through these waters that we find ourselves in.
Thank you. That was beautiful, beautiful. I think I almost went to sleep there and had a little dream. I am notorious for snoring in deep stretch restorative. I'm that person that conks out and ready to take a little nap as soon as the body hits the ground. And it was amazing how it felt with just saying visualize, because I'm sitting up. Visualize curling over to your side, and I felt my whole body like feel the rest of a side lying pose. And I've never done that sitting up, so it's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's important to me I want people to have a formalized rest practice, and it feels critical out here now to me, right? It feels really critical. I'm like, rest is critical. Rest for us is critical. And so I just keep being creative with like, well, how do I share it? And for me, writing the book was that, well, there's only one of me, and I don't teach a lot anymore by purpose and in design, right? But the book can reach places that like Octavia in body just wouldn't be able to travel to. So, and those practices are from the book, and if you listen to the audio, that has a different flavor than reading, because it's more like I was just sitting here guiding you in that way. So thank you. I think we have time for some questions and comments.
And so now everyone has to go get the audiobook so that we can get this practice. And just hear Octavia's voice guide us gently. Let's see. Any questions? Beautiful practice, beautiful. I think you touched on how restoration in yoga differs from sleep. Any other questions? We got the inspiration for the book. Any other questions from anyone attending today?
We don't have any questions, Vicey, but we did have a comment from Charlene that said that she appreciated the grounding of your work, and especially in these times of uncertainty.
Yes. Also, I think someone said, I appreciate the reframing of the word power. Thinking about power, not so much as Sun A, Sun B's, and, Dancing Warrior series, but, have power as a mindset.
Yeah, and as what is the driving force behind us being able to stand in those poses? So for me, the stillness practices, those are the practices where I'm like, ooh, I connect to the breath beneath the breath, the prana, the divinely intelligent life force. And so then now when I do go into a warrior two, it's this completely different expression of my strength and steadiness, right? Because it's from the inside out versus outside in, right? And so I think, to be clear, like I love movement. I do some kind of weight training like every day, y'all, right? And when I overlay it with this steady sense, so stillness helps me to become clear on like my inner compass, like the central guiding point, and then move from that place versus being moved by what I just read on the internet, being moved by what the news is, being moved by all of these, I'm like, those are real, right? I'm not into bypassing in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And I often say, like, it is from stillness that I have taken my most profound, generative, and transformational and activating in the world movements, right? But that's outside in, so I'm like, I think there's a place for power, and I'm so curious what would happen. And it probably exists, I just don't know about it. A power practice that has figured out how to start from the still point and then kind of move outwards. But I also feel like that's what the practice should be doing anyway. And so maybe I'm like, maybe that's an instructional thing. But what I also do know, and this is maybe a little bit of a tangent, is that we can't practice, we can't teach what we aren't in a practice of, and I get a lot of like, well, when are you going to do a restorative training? And I'm like, I'm just waiting, a few years for people to actually start having a restorative practice, like for the yoga teachers asking me that, I go, well, do you practice restorative yoga? And they just start to look around and I'm like, well, for me, teaching restorative only became this kind of natural next step when I started to have a really deep relationship with the practice. Because you can pretend to teach what you don't have a practice of, but you can't teach what you're not in a practice of. And so I also hope for those of us who are teachers on the call or on the brunch chat that we have some really beautiful books on rest by Black women out here in the world right now, right? And that we do take those books, including Pause, Rest, Be, and start to really practice with them.
So we got a couple of questions came up. Charlene says, how might these practices be applied for young children, especially with the increase in, quote, behavioral challenges in Black children?
Oh, that's a good question. So I taught middle school and directed an educational nonprofit program for 10 years of my life. And something so interesting, you all, when I was a middle school teacher, I would take my planning session, which I wouldn't recommend now, right? But I would take this time that I had, and I became like an intervention teacher during my planning period. And instead of some group of young men that kept getting in trouble going to ISS and through suspension for the whole day, they got to come with me and we'd practice yoga. And because I felt really insecure, and I had done a lot of trainings for young people in yoga, including Krishna Kar's Yoga for Youth, which was incredible. And some other trainings, unlike hers, that really emphasized like, keep them active. Though her training didn't do that. But I was listening to the wisdom of those trainings. And for the first 2 times that I worked with this group of young men, I just have them doing all the things. And I noticed every time we got to Shavasana, their faces softened. They looked like little boys. Some of them put their hands on their heart. All these things were happening in Shavasana. And I was like, oh, that's because we did so much movement. That's why they're doing that. And then one day this little boy woke up and said, or got up from Shavasana and said, Mr. Raheem, can we please just do Shavasana? And it was this turning. I was like, you don't want to do all the pose? He was like, I like when we sit and breathe with you. And I like when we do some stretches. And I like when we have time to lay down. And I was doing this guided visualization that took them to like a safe and happy place. And so from then on, my instruction, my time, like if I had an hour with them, we're spending 40 minutes laying down. And so that's just to say that, and so this is middle school A. I have a 6-year-old and he will lay down for 10 minutes. I can get 10 minutes out of him of like a guided rest practice. And I'm not going to speak on behavioral challenges and all of those things because that's not my wheelhouse. But what I can say is that young people are tired. Young people have a lot of stress, and stepping outside of the constant doing and the constant stimulus can be really helpful and healthy for our children. And it's always surprising that they really want to Another experience I have with this is the Yoga Literature Art Camp, which I co-directed with Dr. Chelsea Jackson Roberts for years at Spelman College here in Atlanta. And again, we focused on all kinds of yoga. She would teach a lot of meditation. Then I started teaching the girls restorative yoga and some yoga nidra, and they were like, that's it. I want that practice. I need that, and when we would survey them at the end and go, what are you going to continue to do? And they'd be like, restorative, the rest. If we keep doing a yoga practice, we're going to keep focusing on the resting part, because that's what they knew they needed that too. So how they apply, I would say, depending on the age, they might need to be shorter, but I'm like, young people love Shavasana. Yes, and thank you for putting the Yoga for Youth in the chat. I did that training, I think it was 2007. I think there are a couple more questions.
Yeah, I'll go to the top. We are down to the last 5 minutes, but I'll go to one of the first questions that was asked, and then one of the last questions because it aligned with one of my questions. So 2 questions. The first one is, the book shows the use of a lot of props, and you mentioned your rest place setup, the rest nest. I like that. Put one of those over here in my corner. Is restorative yoga practice possible without the props?
So I'd say classical restorative yoga, you need the props, but the props don't need to be anything you bought at a store. If you got a house, you have a couch cushion, you probably have a blanket, I have part of how I started wearing these scarves, so I wear things that I can fold up, put under my neck, right? It's really nice when you can support every joint, right? In restorative yoga, we really want to support the joints. And the hinge points to allow the body to settle in. And if I'm like, well, I have to take, like sometimes I might take off something and roll it up and support a joint with that. And so it's like restorative to a degree can be possible, because I would also say restorative is relative, right? For the person who's always moving, going, simply laying down on the ground is going to be restorative for them. Is it a classical form yoga, restorative yoga practice? No, right? So it's like kind of 2 answers to that. Restorative yoga calls for the proppage to support the physical body in that way. And something can be restorative just by virtue that it is a different speed or cadence than what we're normally living at or moving through. But I think that's a really great question. Also, in the images in the book, I have like an ottoman, a poof ball that I use in my house, right? I had to play with this. I really wanted to just use all household items, right? But then I also had to because I wanted people to see that you can find things in your house to build this rest nest and to do these practices. And I had to play with this also, like presentation of the book, right? And how the pictures look, so I try to have like, well, this is a home prop, and it's obvious that I got that from home, right? That was sitting up in my front room, right? And but I love that question. And I do encourage people to play with what they have around, and to also remember that something can be restorative without being restorative yoga.
Awesome. Last question, we'll make it quick. What are you reading?
What am I reading? Okay, I'm gonna hold it up. This Here Flesh by Cole Arthur Riley is beautiful. It's beautiful, like a beautiful book. That's what I'm reading right now. And she has a chapter on rest and a chapter on so many other things. My bookshelf is right here. I'm gonna spare y'all, like I'm always grabbing something. But right now, that's what I'm reading.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, Octavia, so much for the time, the conversation, just the fluidity of the flow. I loved it today. Y'all can follow me on Instagram. I don't do much, but just show pictures of my dogs and my kids. It's Spicy Yoga, VICIEYOGA. And Octavia, how can our listeners reach you? I know that Galanda put some websites in the chat. How can we reach out to you?
I'm Octavia Raheem in all the places on IG. That's my website. That's me on Facebook, though I haven't been on any of those platforms in a while, right? Part of my restoration is like stepping outside of that feed. And what I have coming up is I lead a program called Devoted to Rest, which is specifically for Black women and women of color who identify as high achieving, creative, and spirit led. And it is a 6-month mastermind into how rest can awaken us to our fullest power and potential. And so that's what I'm doing as I'm writing and being over here. Can I say thank you to BYTA and to you and to everyone who showed up?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much for being here and for having this protected space for us and for everything you do that we can see. There's so much that we can see, but I also know that means there's 1,000 times more that we can't see that you are doing every day to make sure that BYTA is the place that it is for all of us to have respite in this troubling world. So thank you, Jana. Thank you, Dr. Gil Parker. Thank you, Bicey. Thank you, Galanda. And I think Lorenzo was here too. So thank you all.
Thank you guys so much. If you haven't done it yet, it's not too late to give a review for either of those books, because we know that reviews help push us up that little Google algorithm. If you're not a member, make sure you sign up for BYTA and follow the organization on social media. Thank you all. Have an amazing, blessed day.